Hey, yo, it's me, Pops Fan Marmalade, and you're watching the Comics-Related Madness Network. Huh? So come get some. CromCon. CromCon.
Your favorite podcast is Critical Plus.
The Madness Entertainment Group presents the Madness Comic Network with original programming and additional comic-related content. Tune in and subscribe to Comic Talk with Pops Van Zant on YouTube.
And that's our new opener, folks. Hope you liked it. Welcome to the January 11th edition. This is basically Wednesday Wham! And I'm Dean Zachary, your host. Once more into the breach, dear friends. We're creating beyond calculation, beyond politics, and beyond the big two. And we're joined tonight by the core group without the Wizards of Wordplay. We have Barbara Kaelberg, the Empress of the Inks. We have Rob Davis, the Paragon of Pencils. We have Aaron the Contrarian Humphreys. And we're going to be talking about manga on the march and what we can do about it, because who knows what awaits us in the future. I actually think there's a lot of positive things we can learn from manga. But before we jump right in, I wanted to make some distinctions through definitions. So let's get a baseline here. Manga is the Japanese word for comics published in Japan. It comes from two characters, man meaning whimsical, and ga meaning pictures. So whimsical pictures. They're serialized into magazines in Japanese called tankobon, and there are self-published comics like we try to do here, and they are actually called doshinshi. So it's like Da Vinci, but Dujinsi, excuse me. That's just to lay out the groundwork there, the foundational work, so we know what we're talking about. Manga is sometimes confused with anime. Anime is the animated version of cartoons in Japanese. They started primarily in the late 19th century and developed to what they are now right after World War II, where the idea of taking cartoons with talk balloons and turning them into serialized stories really picked up around the same time ours did. I think part of the difference, and we're getting to get into this in depth, uh, in the nature of both art forms is distinctly cultural. I think in Japan, art is art, and while there are hierarchies and levels of acceptability, their manga artists tend to be rock stars, especially today. The art form of comic books arguably wasn't really that celebrated due to a lot of government smearing in the 50s, which we've read about, and also it was considered a nerd shaming source for at least the late 20th century. It's only in the early 21st century that comics has sort of become this accepted part of our culture. Would you tend to agree with that? Let's go with Barb first. Barb, give us your take on when you were first introduced to the manga phenomena. What did you think, and how did you see it?
Um, the first thing that struck me was the style. They have a very distinctive style,
Mm-hmm.
for the most part. Very, very much different from the American superhero style of art. Um, the thing that always struck me was the great big eyes.
Yeah.
I never understood the fascination with that, but who am I to judge?
They're trying to
Uh,
copy Walt Disney.
yeah, there.
That's
See now,
No,
see
seriously, that's what they were trying to do. The original guy did
Yeah.
was copy the art style of Walt Disney. That's why the
Yeah.
big eye stuck.
they were more concerned with telling the story than they were making highly detailed art. The story was the most important aspect of it. All manga has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Sometimes that end is 40 years down the road, but there are no reboots. The stories are consistent. You can follow it like a serial or like a TV show that runs for years and years and years. It's episodic. So there's very little confusion. If you start at the beginning of story, the story because it doesn't go off onto wild tangents and offshoots and bring in, a whole new cast of characters, stuff like that. It's very consistent.
that's part of what I saw. I also just myself, initially when you first see the imagery, you might be tempted to consider it more young adult or for kids. But as you go a little bit deeper, and again, I was introduced to it more with Akira, which is the anime version. And then, of course, things like Ninja Scroll and things like Ghost in the Shell, where you start to realize they're handling, in some cases, some pretty lofty philosophical questions, and they definitely don't pander. While like many storytelling art forms, some are more aimed at kids, some are more aimed at teens and college kids, and then some are aimed at everyone. So it's a fascinating art form. The main thing I noticed was that culturally it's embraced, where there was not so much of an embracing of American superhero comic books by the entire culture at large, that we were supported all the way up until, I would say, the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We were embraced primarily by a particular fan base.
Oh yeah,
And
I didn't tell a lot of my classmates what I did for a living.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until Facebook that they started following me that they even figured out what I did.
yeah, right.
And yeah, because it wasn't, it was kind of nerdy and
Sure.
weird. And now they're all, you know, they're up. I went back to my class reunion this past summer, and they were like, "Oh, look, it's Barb. She's famous now." And I was like, "I've been doing this for 30 years, and now I'm famous."
Where were you 25 years ago? We're nerd shaming everybody, right? I mean, we're going to get to that, and I want to save that from when I get to Aaron for my question. But I want to go to Rob too, because Rob again has been in the industry a long, long time. And when you first saw manga sort of enter the arena, what were your initial thoughts? Were you kind of like me, where you're like, is this something for kids? What is this exactly?
Well, I saw some of the adult oriented stuff. Doing Scimitar, I was more oriented toward the adult stuff anyway with what I was doing. So I actually I encountered that. So I saw that it was more wide ranging than just kids stuff.
Okay.
And I'm going, well, this is kind of interesting stuff. It seemed like it was really aimed for a very specific, very narrow audience, and I was not one of those people, because and there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
The adult stuff was really adult. I mean, we were getting off into really hardcore. So, and that, I'm into X, but I'm not into, triple, third,
I hear you.
4X stuff.
Right.
So, but,
what did you think of the art itself? Did you think?
I thought it was very highly stylized. Of course, American art is too. It's just, I think that was a cultural thing. It appealed more to that culture than it did to our culture. And now we're kind of, these days, that's not as big a wall for it to overcome as it was then. I think it was very, very narrow when it first hit, and now it's starting to blossom as people find out that there's more to it than just, whatever they ran into the first time, whether it was the more adult stuff or the more kid stuff. They're seeing, well, it's more than that. It's a lot more than that. And my hope is that if manga can open that, then maybe that'll help comics open up to that as well. Because right now, most people think, American comic books they're all for kids. I mean, even despite having fairly and the movies, the Marvel movies, while they are better than the Batman TV series, there's still a little bit of campiness to them. They at least are headed in a more realistic direction for, I mean, we're talking about high fantasy here with people with superpowers. But we're at least headed in the right direction and heading more toward a more open idea about what comic books are. They're not just little kids stuff. They're more than that. I'm hoping manga will help with that.
It might. There was something else I noticed. I wondered if you caught this in your initial exposure to it. Was I noticed that while the figures of human beings were kind of not my cup of tea, I was fascinated with the Japanese abilities in drawing backgrounds, science fiction, particularly machines, mechs, mecha. The science fiction aesthetic blew me away, that their attention to actually making machines seem and feel real, environments in many cases, if it was a structure, just blew me away. I wonder if you noticed
that. I did notice that, but I also, when my investigation of it, or what little readings I did about manga at that time, was I found out that they have even more separation of duties in their comics than we have in ours.
Oh God, yeah.
They have a whole cadre of folks that just do backgrounds.
Really?
Just do certain aspects of the certain people do characters. Some of them do a certain type of character.
That's what Disney does in their animation department.
There's some people that will do just trees, and then some people who do just buildings and stuff.
Right. Exactly. It's very even further broken down. And part of that is because they're constantly pumping stuff out. So you've got this, just like we were doing, American Comics are doing with monthly comic books. They were putting out, these thick books of every month, and so they had a hell of a team just knocking it out every month, and
Right.
so it became kind of a manufacturing machine.
Yeah, it was like a
Also-
factory, like an assembly line with specialized workers. You know, okay, pass it to the building guy. Okay, pass it to the car guy. Pass it to the
Mhm.
spaceship guy. You know,
Also,
pass
it was
to,
more about the comic and the story than it was about the
Yeah,
artists. So there were, I mean,
Correct.
there are superstar artists, no
Yes.
doubt about it in manga,
Absolutely. Mhm.
but it's more of a team effort.
Yeah.
It does seem that way. Aaron, I want to get your take.
Let's
How do you
continue.
feel about it in terms of, number one, do you think the wild success, and we're going to get into the numbers here, worldwide of manga, what do you attribute that worldwide success to? Because we're talking about 10 million units sold, not like 10,000 or 400,000 being a big deal, or even, you know, 500,000. But we're talking about 10 million units sold worldwide for some of these titles. What do you attribute that great success to?
There's a few. That's a multifaceted question.
Yeah, yeah,
It's a
yeah.
tough
Growing up,
question too.
It's tough.
He's
there was a.
laid one in your lap.
I
Yep.
think a lot of '80s kids grew up with anime more than they realized.
Right.
Yeah.
I wasn't introduced to. I mean, I liked Akira, but I mean, I was introduced to manga. I mean, anime with Star Blazers.
Okay.
You know, back then, one of my favorite TV shows was Robotech, which was the
Mhm.
American version of trying to introduce anime to America. And so
Correct.
when Akira came out, it was just so highly animated. It was, I do think, and there's a difference between middle '90s anime and anime today. '90s anime had this edge to it, this punk rock edge.
Correct.
And I think that really spoke to, strangely enough, Generation X, who are punk rockers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think as manga's come up, the one thing people don't realize is Future X1, most manga that comes to America features teenage protagonists or
Mhm.
younger, which means
Yeah.
they directly relate to their audience. Again, it's like, and here it's like, well, Superman's a big, strong man supposed to relate to a kid. And it's like,
Mhm.
the Japanese is like, no, that's stupid. We're just going to make a teenager and
Sure.
relate them. And so, and like, if you've read like almost every one article you post on that 10 top ones, all of them are kids.
Of
Yeah,
course.
and they are questioning the world around them.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
the Japanese are always about growing stronger. There's always that sort of unity of growing stronger. So about growing up, not so much the hero's journey, but growing up and accepting, you know, responsibilities, stuff like that. So I think that connects with the younger audience. Manga wasn't a runaway hit when I was a kid. Now I saw more manga in my comic shops because Dark Horse was my parent company in my city. It was
Okay.
in Milwaukee. Dark Horse was one of the first companies to really start putting out manga over here. I think Antarctic Press might have been the
AP. Right. Right.
yeah. And so when we went in the store, the comic stores, which were most of them were owned by Dark Horse, because Dark Horse started from a comic store, things from another world, they pumped the store with a lot of the manga they were publishing. So manga to me was like all over the place. It wasn't like, again, my comic stores, I found that by talking to Roland, are very different from your comic stores in other parts. Superheroes were in one little corner, then manga, underground comics were very prevalent. It wasn't like this weird thing in the back. They all had their own section. So if you didn't want superheroes, there was a ton of other stuff to look at.
Right.
And we did. And but you know, the one that really, as far as manga books, the one that I really got into that blew me away is Appleseed. And I found that in a bookstore. And Appleseed was the same guy who did Ghost in the Shell did Appleseed. That was his first manga. And so, but I did notice that one thing manga, as far as art, the art is consistent. I think that's kind of super important because American art goes up and down, up and down, up and down. The other thing is a lot of American artists, not all of them, but a lot of them are not really interested in backgrounds. So anime and manga has taken a few things where the backgrounds are supposed to be photorealistic. The characters are caricaturized. And that's how it goes. We focus more on the character, real detail in the character, and the background just kind of there. I didn't realize this, but later on somebody pointed out that when McFarlane was doing Spider-Man, he was actually stealing some of the buildings from the Akira comic and putting them in America. Yeah, he was stealing.
I went down.
He was swiping generously, eh?
Yeah,
I want to submit this to you too because I love to get your take on this. Because you study philosophy, you understand a little bit about Asian philosophy as well, and the heritage in art. The art form, the Asian art form. One of the consistent aspects of the Asian art form, as far as storytelling, is they tend to use template characters. Now, what do I mean by that? The typical samurai, the typical wizard, the typical merchant, the
Yeah.
typical geisha. They're not a lot of concern with individuals. Their concern is with a representative icon of a class. This
Yes.
comes from, I don't want to get too in the weeds, but it comes from the Asian philosophies back all the way back to Hinduism, right? Where you're just four classes and you're one of those four classes and that's it. And the idea was these typical representations then told a story that was supposed to either be instructive, educational, teach you a life lesson,
Right.
what have you. We had that in Western Europe and Eastern Europe as well.
Right.
But here's the thing, the unique part about the European traditions is they really loved focusing on the individuality. When the icons of the medieval period sort of segued into the Renaissance and so on, then we started to become more concerned with the aspects of the individual. Now, let's bring it back to manga. Manga, again, one of the reasons that the characterizations tend to all look the same. The typical schoolgirl that's hyper emotional, the typical young boy who's either hyper emo or he's the hyper nerd or whatever. We're dealing with stereotypes. We're dealing with cliches. So what happened, what I presume that the intention is to create a window for that archetype to relate to the reader so they can be brought into the story.
Right.
And they do that visually. So again, you're going to have the typical jock, the typical nerd, the typical schoolgirl, the typical this, the typical that. I noticed that may be part of the reason we're seeing such standardized cartoon humans with standardized cartoon faces, but the backgrounds are these sumptuous, rich, layered, unique environments. Do you see where that links up a little bit, or am I overstretching?
Even in Understanding Comics, Scott McCloud talked about that they were more interested in, and this even goes back to Disney a little bit. I mean, if you look at Disney animated movies like Bambi and the first started out, the backgrounds are very realistic. The characters are cartoon that mimics manga to a T. But American comics are very much a little different. I mean, and I'm not saying there's some American artists that put a ton of detail in backgrounds, but it's rarity. I mean, the big joke among any comic book artist in America is I hate drawing backgrounds. That was a running joke.
We all hate drawing backgrounds. I'm here to tell you.
Y'all hated drawing backgrounds.
My joke is always, and Aaron, you'll appreciate this. My joke is always when people complain about my backgrounds, I go, I have never heard anyone standing around a comic book store on a Wednesday going, man, I buy this book because the backgrounds are awesome. Look at these backgrounds. Look. Nobody does that. The only people who like backgrounds
unless you're Mobius.
Well, he's not American, so there you go. But that means
true. That's true.
We all complain, about I hate drawing these backgrounds. But honestly, I've even asked people at cons, I've asked people in the comic store, I'm like, would you rather me trace a 3D background and make it perfect, or hire somebody to draw a perfect background for me, or would you rather me just do my own looser, incorrect interpretation, but it's my art? And everybody answers the same way. They go, no, I'd rather see your art, even if it's not correct. I'd rather see you draw your own backgrounds, even if they're looser, not exactly 100% right, whatever. We don't want to see the So again, that may be more of a cultural thing.
Well, the other thing too is manga is very much more focused on the world. You're entering a world.
Yes.
American comics are much more focused on the individual, the main character. I mean, Superman is focused on Superman. When you go to Akira, Tokyo was, like he's even said, Tokyo was one of the biggest characters in that book.
Oh, absolutely.
And so there is a sense of and I think this is going to sound weird. I think a little bit of where the love of manga comes from, especially in the younger generation, comes from video games. I know that's weird, but it's a segue. Japanese dominated video games that came in, but a lot of video games, especially Japanese video games, are about exploring a world.
A world, correct.
And the manga is that. American comics don't do that. They're about an individual person. And I sometimes feel this way a lot with American comics, that they're so much focused on the person, not focused on building an interesting world. And what I'm saying is like
Avatar, maybe something like that.
Yeah, like there's actual the dynamics, in this world, I'll make up something, demons have risen from the grave. Oh, you got to fight demons, but in Japanese, it's like, yeah, but the demons inhabit toys, and like only kids can see the toys, and so the government has to hire kids to see the toys. To see
There you go.
it's
There.
specific. It
It's
is
depth.
unique and specific to the
Correct.
world. Instead of
Yeah.
Superman fights crime Metropolis. Okay, great.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
Metropolis
that's
is its own unique thing, and it's got own unique rules and stuff that are written into the world. That's the same in video games, and that's a crossover. American comics are so into the hero aspect of their characters, they just lose sight of everything else. They're so to me, I get this. Even like I had a friend who complained about that. He's like, yeah, I read American sci-fi comics and American fantasy comics, and they're still superhero comics. They're just dressed differently. It's still the same superhero story I've read and I'm tired of, except this time he's holding a sword instead of a cape.
Gotcha.
And it's true. I've read a lot of fantasy comics from American writers, and it's like, yeah, this is superhero stuff. This
Right.
is
just dressed up. It's dressed
up differently, but it's still superhero stuff.
Right. So what you're saying is the world building is such an integral part of manga that it can't be separated from that. I agree with that. I think that there's some short-sightedness in our creators, because I do want to talk about what we can learn and maybe improve on our own material through studying manga. And the first thing I would say to creators is, don't be afraid to spend just as much time creating the world that your character inhabits as you do the character itself, because it's almost like, and a lot of writers do this here. There's part of it is an appeal dynamic. They want it to appeal to everyday people, so they always set it in our world. And you're fond of saying this, Aaron, and for a change, I agree 100% with you on this. Is that it's I agree with a lot more than that, but I'm just messing with you. It's one of these situations where, why don't you have complete creative control? Why in the world do you want to set something in our world when you don't have to? In other words, you can create this anything you want, and you go, well, it's in New York again.
Yeah,
it's like, again, you want to go in New York? And that, again, a little bit of the critique I had of Nolan's Batman was, as much of the things I loved about it,
it eventually just ended up in Chicago.
Yeah, some of the things I didn't like about it were the artistic aesthetics of it. I'm like, I don't really, one of the charming things about Batman to me was always, it was kind of, Gotham was a world. It was a universe. It was very weird. There were giant statues, and it rained all the time, and cars had weird fins on them, and people wore almost normal clothes, but they were kind of strange, and there was just something a little weird. And Tim Burton had he
nailed it.
He nailed that perfect weird aesthetic. Like, this is almost our world, but it's not really. So again, the template aspect of Batman, the broad brush template, allows you to interpret it many ways. That's part of the strength of it. But again, you could complain about it the same way you have, Aaron, where you say, look, it's still just a superhero dressed up in different ways.
And I just wish somebody would, even if you want to do, because I have a character I'm doing now, excuse me, that's a barbarian, but I made him small and weak looking instead of big and strong, because I thought that'd be funny.
Right.
But he's in a world of, and I like drawing Halloween stuff, so he's in a Halloween world. I have some backstories of him, but not really.
Sure.
Because I used to read Conan, but the thing that was so fascinating about Conan to me was the world he inhabited. Conan was a cool character, but all the crazy monsters and stuff he'd encounter.
Yeah.
I mean, if it wasn't for the world of Hyperborea, Conan wouldn't have been who he was. And I think a lot of people forget that, especially in modern superhero comic stuff that dominate the American comic scene, that's why the only superhero I really like is Wonder Woman, because she fights Amazonian Greek mythical creatures. She's fighting mythical things. She's not in New York fighting like, gee, Spider-Man's beating up another mugger. Wow, I've never seen that, And it gets boring. It gets old. And especially for somebody who wants to see something different. I don't know why Americans play the comic scene so safe, but it feels like they play it safe. Like they got money invested, so we got to play it safe. And I'm like, we've told you before, there's no money in this. You don't have to play it safe. Do whatever you want.
Do whatever you want, because you can.
Yeah.
Because you can. Here's the thing. That's one reason I love the 4 hour. Everybody hates the Snyderverse except for you and me. I feel that. But the 4 hour Justice League movie is exactly what we're talking about. He's like, I've got nothing to lose. I'm no longer doing this. I'm going to re-edit this thing the way I really wanted to do it. It's sci-fi, it's it's the Justice League fighting these alien beings that are
Yeah.
huge, epic, and you saw a lot of things you'd never seen before. Now,
Mhm.
those of us who'd read them in the comics had seen some of these things before, but to
Right.
the movie going audience in general, I mean, they didn't know about all this these characters, these cosmic villains
Yeah.
Steppenwolf. Who's that? Is that a 70s band? What is that? Who is this?
Yeah.
Dark
And
Side. Who's Dark Side? What is that?
and they made him look very alien. Like Steppenwolf, I like because they made him look more alien than usual.
Yes.
Especially
Yes.
the newer version, because you can't imagine it. I don't know why Americans have a sort of
Play it safe attitude.
with imagination,
I think
and
it's money. I
I
think
think
it's
it's money.
money.
Yeah,
It's money. It's well, and that's why it's up to you. Like if you want to play it safe, that's why I'm a big beyond calculation thing.
yeah,
That's why I wrote the motto that I beat everybody over the head with all the time. Is that if you constantly are just going for money, then what are you doing? Just go be a stockbroker. Go do
yeah.
something. Don't do this. This is not about money. This is about your
Right.
love for
Well,
the art and the
none of
passion.
us are getting rich doing this. That's
That's what
for
I'm
sure.
saying, right? I mean, look, Rob, you guys, you and Barb are blessed with being retired, so it's like you guys can do what you love now, and it doesn't matter. The money, if you
Yeah.
make it great, if you don't
Yeah.
make it great. People are starting out. I always say, look, if you try to calculate it, you're going to end up being disappointed because if it could be calculated, everyone would be a millionaire off their comic book, and you can't calculate it. It's a convergence of different things: timing, your particular talent, your particular story, and when it was released, the region it was released, how it was released. You can't calculate that. I mean, would Spawn be as popular if it was released today instead of 1991 or two, whenever it
That's
was?
a good
92.
idea. I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I don't
It's a
either.
lot. A lot of these successes are a product of their time, and
Right.
it's important just to go look. I had a conversation early on in my career with a colleague, and he was all about making money, and I said, yeah, if you're all about making money, what are you doing in this business? Oh, well, look at Todd McFarlane, look at Jim Lee, look at all these.
Yeah,
Right
that's one
time,
in a
right
million.
place.
I'm like,
And
do
Tom
you
McFarlane made
realize?
most of his money from his toy company,
Yeah,
not his
I'm like,
comics.
do you realize that is all? First of all, they made their names off of licensed characters, and then they jumped
Exactly.
off to do their own things. So don't worry about that. It's like if you want to make money drawing pictures, I don't know. I mean, go do something else. I mean, don't do this. This is really about your passion for it.
Advertising. If you're going to be an
Yeah,
artist, a
yeah,
graphic designer, go into
which is what I do.
advertising.
Yeah, that's why I
That's
got my
where the
degree
money
in
was.
graphic design, and my
That's what I
first
was going for when I went.
my first half
They were
degree.
in the right place at the right time.
Right,
That's
right,
it.
and so.
Anybody can do that.
Right. And so what you do is you go have a different job, do this on the side, and do it because you love it. If it hits, it hits. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Yeah.
There are literally people you can talk to, and I know you've had these conversations where they're really trying to fit. Well, you know what we should do? Kids are into the color yellow right now, so I'll put them in a yellow costume. It's like kids are really into stories about girls being rejected by their boyfriends, so we'll do this
Yeah.
girl is rejected by her boyfriend. It's like just stop. Do what you want to do, and it will succeed or fail based on your passion for it. Because people can smell calculation a mile away. They feel like
Yeah.
they've been pandered to. They feel like they're being. They don't like that. Manga doesn't feel calculated, even if it doesn't feel calculated to me. I look at it and I go, man, there must be a market for this. It's selling 10 million copies. Holy moly.
Well, the one thing too is you notice that American comics also panded to the lowest common denominator more than even manga. I'm not saying manga doesn't have its fair share of like
Sure.
sexualization or whatever,
Oh yeah.
but when you go on like Kickstarter or whatever, I mean, it's like okay,
It's
it's like sex sells, but it's like you
pinup.
can tell that those people into making money because like you
Sure.
can make up anything as long as you show boobs at this,
Hey,
you know.
oh, look out. Yeah.
Yeah, and usually most of those stories you read them, and the stories are not even like somebody had to make up something really quick to make because we have to actually make a comic if we're going to sell boobs. That's why I give props to the guys who just sell pinup books. I'm like, well, at least you're figuring, nobody cares about the comic.
Right.
They care about just the nudity, I guess.
Right.
But again, there was a disappointment. I look at American comics. The other thing that I think also American comics have kind of failed at a little bit is being, I know this is going to sound weird, visually interesting from the get-go. So the idea is like you would never see an American comic like Chainsaw Man with a chainsaw coming out of his head.
Exactly.
And yet
That's a whole
exactly,
genre, isn't it?
yeah, no,
That's
it's
a
just
whole
one
genre.
manga. But
It's
I mean,
one manga. It's called Chainsaw Man. I mean,
yeah, and he's got
seriously.
chainsaws, and it just visually looks like, what, this is cool. What is this? Americans never do that, and there's so many image books where it's just some normal dressed guy on the front doing whatever. Like and superheroes are our visual motive, but I do
Mhm.
think there is something about unique, I guess, silhouettes of characters. I mean, a
Mhm.
guy in a cape is kind of whatever, but when you do weird stuff like a guy with a chainsaw coming out of his head, I mean, even I'm going to pick up the book and be like, what is
Just to
going
go, what
on?
in the world is
What is
this?
going on? Right,
You
and
know,
there's usually a pretty funny, interesting idea behind it, and
right,
so the
right.
ideas are just sometimes. I
They're,
mean, you look at their superhero academia series, and I haven't
yeah,
read any of
yeah.
it, hardly any of it. But you look at that, and then you look at their superheroes compared to ours. Our superheroes are buff, strong, mean. One of those superheroes has got hand grenades on his hands and a hand grenade head. Another one is like a frog. I mean, they're
Yeah,
the
it's
goofiest
wild.
looking things, but it's just
It's
visually, it's
yeah.
appealing. It's
It's
visually like, what is
whimsical.
going on? It's
It's
whimsical.
whimsical.
It's
Yeah.
appealing, and I mean, I do think it's funny that that the Japanese, that's like really the only superhero manga they've made. They've made others, but that's really that I know of. And it comes to America and just basically dominates. It just kicks DC and Marvel into the ground. Just literally kicks them into the ground, comic book wise. Movie's a whole nother issue.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm just like, we made the genre. Japan's like, oh yeah, okay, we'll make our own. Come back and just decimate us.
Boom. Facebook user says, I love
Yeah.
this discussion. Excellent topic. Thank you. Dale says, manga is just as prone to jumping on popular trends. Yes, they are. They
Oh yeah,
do
yes
that.
they are. Strange enough, I
Absolutely.
think a lot of the popular trends they jump on are a lot of popular Asian trends. And so
Somewhat,
maybe
yes.
not somewhat.
Yes.
And they do, but again, they're just have I've seen stuff come out of manga where I'm just like, I don't even know what this is, but I've got to check this out. Like
Right. Right.
I remember even with the robots, I had one where like they had, I think that was Girl in Lagan, had like drills coming out all over the robot, like just goofy, weird stuff. And it's not all of it. There's some, I mean, Ghost in the Shell is serious too. But there is a sense where I think the Japanese are really into developing a unique look for each of their mangas, something that's never been visually seen. And a lot of American stuff, even, and this is, I'm gonna poke you guys at little independent comics on the internet. Sorry guys, there's 1,001 independent books I see come out all the time that feature another guy in capes.
Sure.
And you're trying to play into our nostalgia. And
Mhm.
okay, I understand that to a degree, but the thing I don't understand is, and I've seen this from people I personally talked to, they think, like I had one guy, it's like, if I make something like Star Wars, I will get Star Wars fans.
No.
And I'm like, no, you will
No,
not. And they're
you will
like,
not
why? And
get
I'm like, because the people who like Star Wars, and the money they're going to spend is on Star Wars. Why
Yeah.
would they spend money on Star Wars adjacent? They're not looking for that. They're looking
They're
for
not-
Star Wars.
That's a good point. I'm going to jump in here. This comic in 2022 sold 12,282,000 copies. And it's called Jujutsu Kaisen. You know what it's about?
Yeah,
A
I know a
kid
little
who
bit of what it's about.
swallows a kid who swallows a cursed item.
It's a
and
finger. It's a
it only
decrepit
takes-
cursed finger.
It doesn't take full control of his body, which makes him a special case. And he's enrolled in a Tokyo Prefectural Jiu-Jitsu high school where he will learn to hone his powers alongside other Jiu-Jitsu sorcerers. So it's kind of a Harry Potter, like Japanese
Yeah,
style.
except
And
the
I
main
have-
character's
I
cursed.
have something. Is he a teenager?
Yeah,
He's a
of course.
teenager.
Yeah,
Well,
and here's,
course
and I'm going
he
to
is.
read this directly from a
Okay,
website that I
talk to me.
many of manga have children as protagonists
Mhm.
and are coming of age stories using themes such as do your best. Many are told from their perspective of children forced into the adult world of crime fighting or war and illustrate the hypocrisies of the adult world through detailed descriptions of the children's inner turmoil. Many of the Japanese superhero stories have more in common with Star Wars or Harry Potter than the American comics.
Good
Yeah.
observation. Very
Yeah.
good. I've
They
noticed
do.
that there are broad brush themes. You know, Aaron, you're a big one to complain about. It's good versus evil. It's good versus evil. I'm so tired of
Yeah.
that. However, the Japanese love that. That's why they
They
love
do.
Star Wars so much.
But
They
they
love the broad
nuance it,
brush
yeah.
themes of good versus evil. But they're their myriad, and I mean myriad, which means thousands of myriad of inflections of this battle is what makes it so compelling. It's
that's
not
why I
just
like
the
theirs.
same
The
old,
same
same
thing.
old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does Silverline have any books with young protagonists
Why I think
coming
they do.
of age?
I think they do indeed. I think
Yeah.
it's called Divinity. As a matter of fact, there's even one called Cat and Mouse.
I think they're supposed to be young, aren't they?
Yeah, they're young.
Yeah.
So,
well,
so
and
that being
Twilight
said,
Grimm was supposed to be a teenager, a late teenager.
oh
I
yeah,
mean, yeah, he was supposed to be, and he had the opening character was a young Asian female, so she had pink hair, but
Yeah.
but yeah,
interesting.
A
I'll
young,
have to talk to
a
you about
young
that.
female coming of age protagonist struggling with an unknown power. God, that sounds
Hmm.
familiar. Where have I
Sometimes
seen that before?
they don't
I
even
have.
grow up, which makes them fun. I mean, in Akira, I mean, Kaneda and Tatsu are like teenagers, but
Yeah.
they never grow up and become better citizens. They still stay the same
Yeah.
punks they were. That's what I like about them. That's
Right.
one thing I did like about some of the mangas. When they make punk characters, they stay punk. They don't grow
Yeah.
up and become productive
They don't.
citizens.
No, they stay. No, they stay. The appeal of that is obvious. You have your young people who are struggling with becoming adults. What does that mean? What does that mean in today's world? What do I have to do to earn their respect? What do I have to do? How do I work in this new system? And that's really a big part of it. Again, if you look back at Star Wars, you know, some people know it as A New Hope. I know it as Star Wars. Luke is that story really is coming of age. What do I do?
Right.
What am I supposed to do? I'm a farm boy. I have a boring life. I want to do something more exciting. Boom! Here you go. You're swept up into this big war.
You have a power. You have superpowers now.
Yeah.
Strangely enough, but again, like the hero story, there's an arc to the character change, and I even did that in my own story. But a lot of manga characters don't have that arc.
No,
they stay who they are, and I don't understand if that's a reason. But a lot of them never. I mean, if they lack self confidence, they never gain some self confidence here and there. But they kind of stay that, which I kind of like. And again, that is a little bit of a caricature of people.
Sure.
But the characters do kind of stay that sort of. I mean, like even when you watch like Ninja Scroll, Jude, I think was the main guy. At the end, he's still the punk ninja. He doesn't get better, but he just solves the problem.
Well, okay. So, think about. Did you see Blood or the last?
Years, a long time ago. Yeah.
Right. So you've got basically a Buffy the Vampire Slayer type of storyline, right? And Saya is just a deadly force, and I mean, she just wades through everything like this, like a hurricane, and does what she needs to do, and she doesn't really change. I mean, it's just Saya is Saya, and you can't stop her. I think that was one of the appealing things. This jumps a little bit off of manga, but it comes full circle. Their horror films have a similar appeal, especially, you remember way early in the 2000s, The Ring came out, right?
Yeah.
So the Ghost in the Ring, you expected it to have the American full circle storyline. So when they solve the mystery of why Samara is angry and why her spirit is killing people through the TV and all that, well, you find her, you find her tragic story, you bury her, remains. Oh, everything's good. Nope. She still comes out and kills you, and so there's something unique about their focus on, it doesn't have to follow, like you're saying, it doesn't have to follow a preset journey that we all grew up reading and studying. It helps if some of those elements are juggled in and out of or influencing it.
Right.
But it doesn't have to follow it by rote, step by step. Exactly.
No, it doesn't. And I think there's also, I mean, what he said,
American comics tend to copy that which is trending. Everything on the stands basically blends together. It's rare that any particular title stands out to pique a potential reader and to pick it up and browse through it. That's correct.
Yeah.
Aaron has covered that many times.
That's why I went through it with a throwback style.
Yeah. I think it's important. Again, if you're a creator and you're thinking, I want to have success like manga, that's a great goal to have. But don't copy manga. Copy the approach of manga, which is what? Build a world that's believable. Build a huge, deep, interesting world that is believable. And people will come to it. It may not be everybody. It may not be as many people as you want to come to it. but
Right.
you'll be doing what you want to do, and you won't be selling out to some template or some
Yeah.
edit,
or an
you
image
know?
look or whatever, that's
Yeah,
supposed to
or
be
whatever you're
popular.
selling.
Do what
It's
fits the
weird.
story, not a style that is popular because it may not fit the story.
Right.
Correct.
It's funny that there is an actual look to image books, which I always thought was funny. Now I know
Mhm,
every company has to brand their stuff, but I always
mhm.
thought it was funny for a company built entirely on independent comics that they all look the same. How, only America can pull this off.
Now,
Like
part of that
I'm
was
like seriously. I'm like, how is this?
okay.
And
I was part of that generation, so I'll tell you why some of that happened. A lot of these guys were emulating the leaders of that movement because again,
yeah,
success breeds copycats, right? So, hey, just because Todd draws a certain way, if I draw kind of like Todd, I'll make as much money.
yeah.
Jim Lee has a lot of hatching. If I draw kind of like Jim, I'll get. And we
I
all
was
fell into that.
told to change my style
Why? Why
to
would you? Why?
emulate those guys if I wanted to
Really?
stay in the industry. Yeah,
Yeah.
Oh, for crying out
Jim
loud!
Jim Valentino told me that. I was on a discussion group with him on CompuServe,
Yeah,
and he told me I needed to change my style
yeah.
so that
That's
I could. So
ridiculous. That's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
see, and
well,
I was
that's
a,
what
I
I
was
told
a,
him.
Classic.
I was a brush inker, and I was asked to emulate the pen,
Yeah,
that
the
image
quill
The
use,
pen.
the pen
crow
style.
the
Yeah.
quill hatching.
Which was
Yeah,
that guy, which was mostly Silver Street. But is it
yeah,
well? No, McFarlane did that a lot too. I'll give him that. But
yeah,
Silver
yeah.
Street did that sketchy stuff.
The funny
Yeah,
thing was, is I could imitate it with a brush.
Of
yeah,
course,
you can.
Sure,
you
you
can.
can.
Here's
Yeah,
here's what I love though. You can always tell the success stories where that was their natural style because they're still doing it and there's a growth to it and an enthusiasm. It doesn't feel
hmm
artificial. And that
Yeah,
is people like Silvestri. Okay. Dude is the scratch master. Okay. He can
Hmm.
scratch
oh yeah,
anything and it looks totally real and totally believable in his world. If you guys are not picking up his latest Batman Joker thing, you should just to look at his art. It has
yeah,
matured. It's fantastic.
Oh, I
It's
love his
still
stuff.
it feels like he's channeling Bernie Wrightson, but in a more superhero way. But
Oh, that's
his
cool.
world is fantastic, and all he does
yeah.
is hatch it out. Man, it's a million lines, and then
But it's organic.
I still respect people like Mike Mignola, who is like no line. Everything's block. Everything's just block here
Yeah.
and shapes and
I think that is one thing American comics do have over mangas. We have a lot of varied art styles,
yeah,
but
we do.
sometimes that could be good, and then that can also bite you in the butt when not
Yeah,
every style is working.
yeah,
But I do tend to. I'm attracted to manga that either has perfected the manga style or done it better. Because there's a lot of manga pickup. I'm like, that's mediocre representation of the style. They
right,
could do better.
right.
And it's funny. The one thing too that people have said many before, and I've heard this before, that a lot of the manga that's coming to America is the cream of the crop from Japan. So they had, I mean, like, there's a ton of manga in Japan that burns and fails, just like
Yeah,
American comics.
of course.
It's like, but we're in depth in the American comics, so we see American comics burn and fail and some success. But since we get all the cream of the cream from Japan, to us it looks like, well, they just can do no wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah, because they're
that's
bringing
part of
over
it.
the best.
Sure.
Though they have a huge fan base in Japan, they come over here.
Yeah.
So it's skewing the image a little bit. Like, yeah, there's just as many people that make manga and burn and fail over there. They're just not coming to America. Just like the Japanese are probably not seeing a lot of independent comics that burn and failed over here come over there. So it skews the image a little bit.
Of course
Do
it
you
does.
guys, do any of you guys follow web comics at all?
Some.
Some.
Yeah, I surf it in there. It's just drowning in manga wannabes.
Yeah.
Oh, is that
Manga
right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I know Webtoons is owned by a Korean company. And I think that's also, I don't know, webcomics started out, and I think there's a lot of manga, so and a lot of kids now are introduced to comics through web comics, not comics off the book. I mean, we were introduced to comics, you'd have to go buy one, and here's a comic
Yeah.
book.
Right.
Now people are younger, introduced to web comics. Since
Sure.
majority of the people doing web comics or manga, they go from that to the printed. They're starting out with manga, and so that could be a difference. This is why to this day, I've never quite understood why America's never had an American superhero, American style web comic service. well, we're not going to do that. I'm like, yeah, well, Japan did it.
Okay,
and Korea
you might
did
want
it,
to think about
and
that.
it's actually helping. And
Well,
and not all of it looks like that. I mean, Lore Olympus is one of the biggest webcomics out there, and it's not manga at all. But it's romantic, and so people
Yes.
like romance too.
That's something that American comics don't touch on a lot. Is
It's
there is a
romance.
lot of romance in manga comics,
Yeah.
and there's lots of super in love couples and stuff like that. And while we have some iconic couples in American comics, Lois and Clark, and MJ and
Yeah.
Peter, stuff like that, we don't have a huge emphasis on romance.
Right. Because a lot of
in manga comics also, they have their books, they have something for everyone. They have comics that are specifically designed to appeal to young girls, young boys, teenage girls, teenage boys, young women, men, the mature crowd. I mean, they have across the board, you can find something. You can find family-friendly books. You can find adult books. You can find adventure or superhero or fantasy or just an everyday Joe going about living his life. You can find anything.
There's a lot more there. We got some comments here, guys. Facebook user says Silvestri's latest is fantastic. You are correct, sir.
Yep.
Great point in the manga imports. Lots of manga fail in Japan. That is correct. Aaron brought that up. So much more diversity of genres in manga. I want to touch on that before we get to the mechanical side, the numbers side of things. I want to touch on the fact that the diversity of concept is true diversity, not superficial diversity. And I'll touch on this and see what you guys think. Is it truly diverse to take an existing character and either gender swap or change them in some way to virtue signal diversity? Or is it better just to do a completely new character?
It's a cheat.
Yes. I mean,
it's a cheat.
It's a cheat. In other words,
if you want that, create a new character.
Create a new character. Exactly. And so again, Aaron's touched on this earlier. There's a laziness that sadly that we admit to, because we're gonna speak truth here. We're not going to try to hide it. There's a laziness to some American editorial departments where they really just want to do what they want to do, and it's like, well, we don't want to risk making up our own character that fits this particular demographic. We're going to take a successful one and make it this way. We're going to take
if the writing's good enough, the new character will be a smash hit.
Right. Right. In other words,
I think it's a little bit of sticking it to the man, though, to switching gender swapping. I mean, there is a point of like they're going to take something that's popular from I'm not going to use the words on this channel, whatever, but it's popular in certain things, and switching it to kind of stick it to the man. There's a political statement in gender and making certain characters gay, which I'm like, whatever is fine. But if your point is the political message, it's sometimes kind of lost on the fans. I think you'd be better making a new character and doing the political message through that than trying to force it into somebody's viewed Captain America, and well, now Captain America is this or that, and and it's like, okay, I don't really
you
get
do your
the
own
point.
character?
Do your own character.
Here's the thing, like, okay, let's take Thor, because Thor is so archetypal and such a template. We all understand what Thor is supposed to be. And you kind of go, okay, here's this, the penultimate Viking, right? And God of Thunder. Okay, let's make a female Thor. Well, okay, that's fine if that's what you really want to do, but wouldn't it have been cooler to invent this? You've already got Valkyrie. I mean, you've already got characters.
There was a female Thor. Her name is Thordis.
Okay, see,
way back when.
Okay, but again, doesn't it diminish? And this is a whole nother conversation, but it's food for thought for you folks out there. But doesn't it diminish femininity to make women behave like men? Right? The Greeks had something in their mythology that was fantastic to me, and that was the power of the female was that she was different from a man. And that made her extremely powerful. She was never perceived as weaker. It was completely like, actually, in a lot of ways, she's stronger. And their mythology reflects that in so many ways. This whole idea that you have to make them act more. Well, this is a strong woman. Why? Because she's acting like a man. Well, no, actually, you just made her weaker, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
well, it's also taking on the worst traits of men. Like, hey, men like to conquer and take over things. Well, if I make a woman do that, then it's like we
Right.
don't like men because they do that. But if I make a woman who does that,
Then it's
that's
okay. In other
then
words,
it's okay. Yeah,
right?
and I'm like,
Take a male jerk behavior and turn a female toward that and go, well, now it's okay because a woman's doing it. What? You just like
yeah,
inverted everything you're saying. So anyway, that being said, I think that weakens the position of a character. Taking an existing successful character, gender swapping, changing them, making them this or that, just make up your own stuff. You can do anything. There's such a freedom in this realm, in this arena. Go out and make up your character. Do exactly what you want to do.
well, the funny
And,
thing is, I'm sorry. It's like manga's never really cared about that. Like a lot of manga
yeah,
characters don't.
yeah,
You really can't define their nationality or certain things a lot of the time because they have colored hair or big eyes.
sure.
Um, and so it was more of just the character represented the story. I always saw manga characters as more cartoon. They're supposed to represent a cartoon character, caricature of a human being
Yeah,
than any specific nationality.
they're
per se.
representing an archetype like we were discussing
Yeah.
earlier. The typical schoolboy, the typical schoolgirl,
Right.
not
They're an
necessarily
icon rather than a
right,
yeah.
an icon,
Yeah.
not necessarily like Peter Parker. One could argue, well, he's the typical teenage nerd. Well, he is, but there's things particular to Peter Parker that are just him, and
Yeah.
those remain. They're not as concerned with that. Before we move on, I really want to get to some of these numbers because I want you guys' input on why you think these crazy numbers exist. I'm going to just pick some statistics here. Comics and graphic novels, percentage of volume sold. Okay, this is the NPD group source. All right, from January of 21 to January of 22. So this is a specific time. And I'm looking at a pie chart here. And comics and graphic novels and manga were up 76%. Superheroes were up 16%. And all other genres were 4%. Now, 76% of an increase in market is insane. Now, again,
Yeah.
we're just coming out of the pandemic, and that's a lot of people were reading a lot of manga and streaming a lot of material and so on. But it's just, what do you guys think these numbers are reflecting? Do you think that it is a function of culture? Is it a function of right place, right time? Is it a function of the changing of the guard, so to speak, where superheroes are now sort of stepping back and new worlds are stepping forward?
I think it has a
Aaron,
little
go ahead.
bit to do with cartoonish. I mean, even like coming from Disney, a lot of characterized of cartoon world. I think manga and stuff does a good job of, again, creating that visual language that's fun and exciting when you watch cartoons, the shapes or
Mhm.
whatever. American comics have always been so, and this is not even American comics, Americans in general. Like, yeah, I'm sure Rob and Dean have always had that. Like, the more realistic your art looks, the better it is. The less realistic your art looks, like, well, I don't get it. I got this all the time. Like, your stuff looks cartoony. I don't get it. You should draw realistic. And of course, you tell them like, well, you always have to learn how to draw realistic to draw cartoons and blah blah blah. But I do think that speaks. It's an easier language to learn. I think I'm guessing this is a guesstimate. I think sometimes manga and stuff could be more fun and less intimidating. I sometimes feel that a lot of the superhero stuff, it can be kind of intimidating because it is showing a caricature of what humans could be. I
Mhm.
mean, like, when I looked at, Batman, I always thought it was funny that superheroes, one, were always buff. Even like, I remember there was a guy in this comic, New Warriors, and even as a kid, he was telekinetic. He moved things with his mind, and he was ripped. I'm like, why?
Why do you
Why
need
would
to
he
be
need that?
you don't have
He
to
can
be
move
ripped.
things with his mind. Why would he need that? But and they never really work out. Like,
Right.
I've noticed the same thing in movies. I see like all the love interests for women. It's like all the guys always have tone and ripped, and you never see them in the movie work out. They sit around, they drink beer, they watch TV, and they just naturally physique.
That's
I'm like,
amazing, right?
okay. And so
That's their
it's
superpower, I guess.
That's their
that's their
superpower. That's what it is,
superpower.
Aaron. Yeah, but well, I want to address what you said earlier. First, I'll read this Facebook
Yeah.
user new character. It's definitely lazy,
Lazy
pandering, and a
pandering.
money grab, just like
Yeah.
multiple covers. The only real winners from this trend were the Comicsgate creators. That's a
Yeah.
good point. I think if you're lazy, you're just going to take something that exists and then mutate it into what you want to say.
Right.
Again, you're just stealing somebody else's stuff. Now, you mentioned earlier, Rob and I and Barb as well, we were kind of, we grew up in an environment where realism was a thing, where it's like, cool. But I really did understand it a little bit more than that. I understood a little bit more in the martial arts world, where Bruce Lee had to learn the traditional forms before he then evolved them into
Oh
his
yeah,
own form.
absolutely.
So it was a training exercise. It was more like, I remember my professors in art classes were telling me, look, we like the way you draw. We're not trying to make everybody draw alike. What we want to do
Right.
is get you to understand light, shadow, volume, weight, and how cast shadows work, and how multiple light sources work. And then go have fun, draw like you want, do what you want to do. So I did go through a snobbery period where, it was only good if they could draw realistic. But then I realized, you know what? I absolutely love Mignola's distortions. I absolutely love this caricature. If it's done consistently well and it continues to tell the story and it's compelling, go for it, man. I'll
Yeah.
follow. If I can see that, and I think people resonate with that. If it's genuine, people can sense it's
Mhm.
genuine. Hey, I don't care if it's cartoon. If it's genuine, it's how you feel. It makes me feel something when I look at it. I'm there. I'm with it.
I think it also
I'll
feels,
follow it.
and this is more of American comics than manga.
Yeah.
Americans have the ability to do this. Like Magnola, his
Mhm.
style made Hellboy feel cohesive and like its own thing, regardless of
Mhm.
the character.
Mhm.
I think Americans, because of the art style, can feel this way. There's a gentleman, I can't remember his name, so if anyone on listening remember, he did a comic called Murder Falcon. He's done some other stuff. It was great. It was totally funny. He's got a very unique style, and when his books, and so it brings you into the world. And of course, it's like this is basically, and this is what I mean by doing anything. This is why I thought this comic was so funny. It was an American comic, and he's like these kaiju attacking or monster attacking America, Earth, and the only way to defeat them was heavy metal. And so this guy would play heavy metal, and if you played
I
heavy
love it.
metal, then this character called the Murder Falcon would show up and start kicking butt. And I'm like, that's hilarious. I just loved it. It was, and there was much more to the story than that. But
Sure, sure.
I read this, I'm like, this is something completely different. You got this crazy mutant falcon dude with a metal arm. You got heavy metal. This is what I'm talking about. This is something that I found that's different. I've never seen anything like this. Love it.
Mhm.
Can I have
Mhm.
more of this?
Mhm.
I was
And this guy,
actually shocked when I saw my first Mike Mignola art because I'm like, "What is this?"
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm.
And
And
it
sad,
took me a minute or two, but I loved it after a while. But at
Mhm.
first, I was like, "I don't understand this at all. What is he doing?"
when
You
I
know?
heard when I saw Magnola, I saw him in doing Marvel superhero books, and I hated him. And the reason is because his style doesn't fit superhero books. But once you put him in gothic horror, boom, and
Yeah.
it just fit. Yeah. Is it Daniel
Um,
Warren Johnson? Yeah,
yep,
John
there it
Crummer.
is.
He's done a few other books. He's a fantastic artist, and but again, just unique. And again, he's Image, so I'm like, Image can make different things. He just kind
Yeah,
of hunt,
absolutely.
And but even to this, I mean, there's so many people, the poor Image books. I mean, I actually have heard people online going, yeah, Image books all look the same, which still blows my mind. I'm like,
Isn't
how
that
is
weird?
that?
Welcome, Brent, to the
Yeah,
discussion. We have been we've been talking about manga, Japanese cartoons, of course, and their great success in this country, and we're sort of trying to unlock the puzzle of why, and some of it we've stumbled into some semi clues, like perhaps their culture is a little bit more open to creating completely new worlds rather than feeling locked into formulaic storytelling that some American comics seem to be locked into. And but the other thing we noticed was that a lot of their cartoonish nature of their characters are because their culture, in many ways, tends to use typical iconic drawings for humans, but their worlds and their backgrounds tend to be very unique and super detailed. I wanted to get your take on when you first were exposed to manga. what were your thoughts? What did you think of it? Was it something so foreign that kind of intrigued you, but you were into it, or you didn't like it at all? Or give us your take on when you were first exposed to manga.
When I was first, now are we talking manga or are we talking anime?
Could be
Manga.
anime, because anime is sort of the animated version of
Okay.
what we're talking about. So
This is where I show how little I know about a whole lot of things, because I don't actually think I've been exposed to manga at all. The closest I've got is, and I can show it on my shelf, but I got the Attack on Titan omnibus. It's
Okay.
this thick. I can't wait to get into it. I got it for a great deal at a con, but I own some. I have never actually read it, but I own some. So hopefully that'll get me some points. But as far as anime goes, I rented, that's how far back this goes,
wow, Blockbuster, what's that?
VHS copy of Akira from a Blockbuster when I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, I don't know why this is so huge, which is not to say that I thought it was bad. There's just a part of me that's like, this is a huge thing. Why is it huge? That was back when they called it Japanimation. So
Oh yeah,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
of course. Yeah.
You know where I was when I first saw Akira? San Diego Comic Con.
Oh,
They opened it in the nearby theater at the Horton Grand, or not at the Horton Plaza.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a bunch of us went over to see it, and we were all like,
I was, I had the same reaction. I had that in Akira. I was living in Atlanta at the time, and we went and saw this thing. We were blown away. The second time I was blown away was seeing Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah.
And I was like, what in the world? Because it felt really Blade Runner-esque, but it was just this world, this cyberpunk world was amazing. It was so real. And that's a lot of what has dominated our discussion, was this ability to create a fully realized world, and you feel like you're going into that world when you experience these stories. There seems to be an openness, a willingness to create bizarre worlds. We were talking earlier, Brent. There's actually a manga comic called Chainsaw Man, right? And he's got a chainsaw on his head. Yeah. So, they just go for it. It's like, hey, you know what? The top selling manga, 12 million copies of this thing worldwide, is called One Piece. And it's a treasure hunt by pirates, right? Hunting for this one piece of treasure. It's one gold piece or what have you. And you go, really? That's that popular? Yes, it is, because of the whole cast of bizarre characters in it, and the way the story's told, and the world that's created there. I don't know if you guys have seen the anime Spirited Away, but if you haven't, Brent, you need to see that, because it exactly encapsulates what I'm trying to describe here, which is when you enter the world of Spirited Away, you are brought into the spirit world that the author has created in such a way through the eyes of this young girl. And it's terrifying and eerie, because to us, the mechanics of a tea room are something we don't understand, but you do start to understand that this is an oppressive factory style environment for this young girl to get swept into, and there's spiritual beings attending this tea room, and she's basically into this forced labor situation where she's a slave to these spiritual beings. And there's some really truly unforgettable moments in the film, but again, it's something you've never seen before. And
Miyazaki does all that. He's considered almost the Walt Disney of Japanese animation.
Yeah.
Actually, that was my question. Does Miyazaki's films, is Studio Ghibli considered anime? Or is it just considered Okay, I did not know that. I've seen a lot of his films, and you're right. He does world building like no one else I've ever seen. So,
and that's a huge difference. One of his big things is he does very huge landscape shots. Even in Spirit, he'll pull the camera back and show landscapes, world building. It's just a different take. Again, reason why animation is so big in Asia is literally the difference in cost. Like, animation in America is very expensive. so it's easier to film live action. It's reverse in Asia. It's very easy to animate something. It's cheaper, and it's very expensive to film things over there. So it's literally economics that has dictated Asians get more animation, we get more live action. As dumb as it is, that's what it is. Most American animation is still outsourced to Korea and other places to actually have the animation done because it is so expensive to do it in America.
Oh yeah, Facebook user says there's a lot of similarities to what's occurring in the American comics industry, and as the auto industry, he's right about that.
Yeah, also, especially during the '80s. Yeah,
he especially he says I first saw Akira at Horton Plaza. Yeah, a great place to see a movie like that. What really intrigues me, and I want to get your take, Brent, also is the mechanics of manga tend to focus on a complete story. You know, we were exposed as youngsters to this serialized 22 to 25 page cliffhanger, and sometimes they were individual stories. But as things progressed into the 90s and the early 2000s, certainly the template of 4 to 6 issues eventually collected into a graphic novel and then repackaged and resold and whatever. The manga model seems to be complete story, variation in number of pages depending on the time for production. But do you think, in your opinion, are the sales of manga being so high worldwide, does the complete storytelling approach have something to do with that, in your opinion? What do you think?
You mean with why it's so popular?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll be honest. I like cliffhangers. Marvel. I was a Marvel guy in the 80s and 90s.
Mm-hmm.
One shot concept was one that just kind of left me cold. I love the idea of waiting. It's so weird. Comics taught me a lot about life, which frankly is something that's kind of fallen out of favor in the last 10 or so years. The idea that you can have everything right now. And I'm like, why do you want everything right now?
Binging.
Binge watching. And
Instead, give it some time to savor and percolate. I mean, that's like saying I want Christmas every day. That's insane. I want Christmas once a year so I can look forward to it.
Well, we're not necessarily saying that that manga does things in one shots. We're saying that they are consistent. It's a serialized, but it's a continuing. They don't chop it up. They don't bring in.
It's not a soap
They don't
opera.
do reboots. They don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
they
it's
don't
not
do
just
crossovers.
American comics adopted the soap opera
approach, especially the X-Men.
They don't do
Thanks
like
to
huge
Claremont.
crossovers where you have to buy 15 books to follow different books to follow the such a story. You know, they don't do any of that stuff. They're just consistent.
I actually am a fan of. I love the story that has an end point in mind.
Yep.
Well, it's a payoff for the reader. If you're going to invest
Rory
into the story,
Happy
you want to
birthday,
see
Rory.
it end.
Oh, thank you.
That was always the problem with a lot of the American comics for me, is there was no payoff eventually. I mean, Batman's always Batman. He's never ending. You know, it's like he said, it's never ending war on crime. Yeah, because the book will never end, so technically they're right.
Yeah.
We have a Facebook user saying Miyazaki is an absolute genius. He starts with a single sketch and builds an entire film around his muse. The fact that he world builds to such a degree fascinates me, and that's part of why we stumble on Rory. One of the part of the formula for the success of manga we've come to understand is the Japanese culture embracing comic books as an art form that didn't have the unfortunate nerd shaming quality that ours did. Which thankfully we've grown out of most of that now.
Most of it.
Now it's
most of it.
Some of
I
it's
wonder-
still there.
I wonder if that's because they're such a homogenous culture.
That's part of it. The other part of it is they have a respect for art that is sometimes not embraced by Hollywood. It seems like if we have a successful comic book, once the suits in Hollywood buy the rights to it, they're instant experts on the character, and they know better how to turn this into a successful movie than the people who've been writing it for decades. So, you know, there's a sort of weirdness there where in Japan, as I understand it, if you wrote the manga and it's wildly successful and they turn it into an anime, you're probably heavily involved in that. You're not just bought off and told to run along, little one. You know, we'll take it from here and show you how it's done.
I know my favorite thing about Hollywood.
Yeah.
You think your stuff's good? We'll make it better, right?
We'll make it better. We know how to really make it sell.
Live action movie.
Dean, you know the story I did.
Yes,
told
Rob,
about
tell
that.
your story in a PG-13 fashion, if you will.
I don't remember who told me this, but it's the story about about movie making, and where the guy that's scouting out scenes for a location for a specific scene, and he finds this lake in the mountains, and it's a gorgeous vista, and he brings the producer in to show him the location. So the guy says, "Look, isn't this perfect?" And the producer says, "Well, it's almost perfect." So he pees into the lake, and then he says, "Now it's perfect."
That's so good. That just really
that's the whole idea. That's what Hollywood's all about. I got to stick my into this to make it better.
Yeah.
So you know, then I got my fingers in it. It's mine now.
It's mine.
Yes, it's part of me. So now it's worth something.
Now it's worth something.
Right.
It's a control issue.
Yeah.
We've all come across the middle management guy who has to insert himself into everything, every project that comes along, and that justifies his job. It's not that he's actually contributing. It's just I put my red mark on it, so I'm the reason it was successful. Rory, since you're the latest attendee here, give us your. I'll ask you what I've asked.
Gotta go. Good seeing you guys.
Look at this. Look at this. You gotta run now. Hey, run away! Run away!
Run away!
Brave Sir Robin.
Bravely ran away.
When you were first introduced to manga, did you? How did you react? What did you think of it? Was it intriguing? Was it repulsive to you? How did you react when first introduced to manga?
So first, I was introduced to anime.
Okay,
that was just my generation was that first group going through like Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, right? And then realizing, oh, this came from something else. So, like looking back to source material, and only manga I could get my poor hands on was at the library, which didn't have a huge selection, but it grew over time. And at first, picking it up, like, oh, this is
Blazers.
What's that?
Am I the only one that grew up with Star Blazers?
Never heard of it.
What about?
I knew about Star.
I knew about it. I knew about it, Aaron.
I was just kind of curious. I'm like, wow, am I the only one?
It was outside my interest, but I knew about Star Blazers.
Oh yeah,
I heard about it.
And Robotech. Yeah, I remember. And
I was very intrigued. Oh, Appleseed. Yeah, I was very intrigued by it, and so I just delved into it, and I found, I don't know, probably 10 or 12 titles that we had. And of course, there was like, if there's 15 a volume, we had like 1, 12, 40. You know,
yeah.
Like, I have no idea what's going on, but this is fun to read. And I liked it because each one that we had was so very different from the other. You had giant robots, you could have space aliens, you could have, just on Earth and just, completely non-supernatural at all, but just like realistic stories. The genres are also over the map, which I don't know if that holds true today, because I went to the local bookstore here and saw this like 15 by 15 book racks of manga, and they all look the same. Like looking at the cover, you have no idea what it's about.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know if it's just rubber stamped nowadays or what, but
that probably has more to do with the bookstore's buyer, who looked at the numbers and solely bought the titles based on the numbers and has no idea what the stories are about and what might or might not sell. Tell us, do you have any thoughts about what aspiring creators could learn about manga? What was successful about it to you that maybe creators who want to get into the biz might want to learn from it?
His fan is running hard.
I was thinking I enjoyed it because it's like a fast read. It's very quick. You feel like you're getting through something faster. I don't know if it's just because it's formatting where it's like, 4 or 5 panels to a page and flip, instead of like 6 to 8 panels on a page where it's like, okay, I'm spending a lot of time here moving my eyes around. And it's just a smaller book that you can go through them faster. It's, I don't say simplified because a lot of them have very heavy themes, but it's easy to read.
Yeah.
I could pick up issue 12 and just read through it and get some kind of enjoyment out of that, even if I didn't read 1 through 11.
Did you
So
feel like
maybe-
it was a complete story in itself, even though it was part of a larger arc? But
Yeah.
did it feel like beginning, middle, and end that you were reading?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Did
That's
any of you guys ever get to work on any manga books?
No, I personally have not. What about you, Barb?
Tiger X by Ben Dunn. It was my first book in comics.
Now, did you?
Wow.
When you were exposed to that, did you have access to, let's call it the story Bible, the background information, or any of that? You were just inking. You were just.
No, actually, I was doing gray washes, but yeah, I worked on like a few issues of that doing gray washes. And what struck me is that was my first exposure, not only to professional comics job, but to manga itself. And the characters it was all, big mechanized robots and
What was the name of it?
Tiger X.
Okay, yeah, I remember that. Wasn't it Antarctic?
Yes. Ben
No.
Dunn. She mentioned Ben Dunn, who runs.
Yeah, actually, it was Eternity was doing it at the time.
Oh, okay. So that mecha
they were
idea-
affiliated for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. But
That's
it struck me because
that's where I got my information on the manga and that style of stuff, because I got a bunch of free stuff from Eternity when I was doing Scimitar.
And it was a lot of mechanized, huge, 10-story robots and big-eyed people. And that was my first.
That was your first exposure to that. Our Facebook user who's been giving us really great comments. We appreciate it, by the way. Spot on about the Japanese manga and the transition to anime. The creators are encouraged and invested in the production, which lends consistency for fans, the polar opposite of a Hollywood production. Yes, indeed, it is.
Yep.
That's I would encourage people who are aspiring to do creative storytelling, sequential art, comic books, as we call them, manga, as the Japanese call them. Do what you want to do. Don't try to emulate what's successful, because the best you can hope for when you emulate success is, I'm almost as good as what
The
you're
person
trying
who's
to
getting all
emulate.
the fame and stuff. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
and the thing is, are they going to hire you, or are they going to hire the guy that actually does it?
Yeah.
Right.
I may have told the story.
Well, he's probably more expensive.
Yeah,
he is.
Indulge me for a moment here. When I had my portfolio reviewed by one of my heroes, Neil Adams, and he basically said, "Look, you're in the realistic school, so I'm gonna tell it like it is here. You want to draw like this? You got to be better at drawing from real life. Go back, get photo reference, learn how to draw this stuff from real life." And I made the mistake of saying, but won't that ruin my style? And he just looked at me with a just level glare, and he goes, "Did it ruin Norman Rockwell's style?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, no. And he named 3 other artists. And he's like, go back, take your photos onto your desk. So I went home, and for a year, I did nothing but draw from photographic reference. And it was like the toughest coach I ever had. But I was glad he was tough on me like that, because it made me work harder, and it made me a better artist. So I would tell you guys, if you're going to do the realism school, don't be worried about, it's going to ruin my style. It's not going to ruin your style. It's always going to be you, but you got to learn.
It will inform your style.
You got to learn.
It will inform your style. Your style will come from that.
Learn
That's why it was so
you
fun.
Got to form before you riff on it. Before you
It's so funny about giving
learn the
your
rules
realistic
before you try to
style.
break them.
Oh, look at that!
Oh yeah, look at that.
Great, Barb. Thank you.
Amazing.
Whoa.
That's
why
your
it was so
realistic
fun
style.
having Dean draw my Godlings characters, because they were not really. I was thinking it makes sense of the lightning guy. All right, Dean, let's see. He did some. Yeah, he was just like, "What is this crap?" So, but it was interesting coming back. Yeah,
I had a great time doing that. I loved inflecting those characters through my style, because I was like, how would I draw this? How would I take this? I'm facing that again, by the way. I've been asked to do Friar Rush cover, so that's gonna be fun to do, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna have a great time looking at how I take on Jake and the Good Sister and Friar Rush and all that. It's gonna be fun. But I wanted to open the floor here. Did anybody want to say anything about what you guys think in terms of anime influencing us? Is it something we should be terrified of? Oh my gosh, we better start doing what anime does or we're going to die. or is it something positive?
I think
Anybody?
it's positive. I mean, I always think it's any attention on the comic art form is positive in here or there. I think if it helps Americans step up their game, Marvel and DC is going to be Marvel and DC. But I do think that if it encourages American artists to try more different things and not always want to do the same superheroes over and over again, I'm all for it. Not that I'm seeing that happen. I'm just saying, because it's more interesting for me. I go into most American comic shops. My eyes kind of glaze over until I find the needle in a haystack book that looks cool, just because I'm picky. I don't collect series, so maybe, and this might help infer people who've been listening to me on this series for a long time, these podcasts, and just think, Aaron, that guy is a punk, which I don't. I admit that. But I'm always looking for something I've never seen before, and so I go into comic shops, I wander around, and I buy random things. I don't really collect series per se. I just buy whatever I think would be interesting. I've never seen this before. I've never seen that, and I will buy it. That's why I love the library, because the library seems to get like all sorts of random stuff. And so I like research. I read all sorts of stuff. And because of that, I've tended not to buy any superhero stuff because I've been there, done that. That to me, it's just my personal. I've been there, done that. This is nothing I can get out of it.
Absolutely.
And so the only superhero series that I've collected over the years is the Invincible series when I got the hardbacks. But beyond that, this doesn't do anything for me. I'm looking for anything more unique and different. And so I'm always hunting stuff down.
So unique and different, as Aaron says, as I say, create your own worlds. Don't copy. Do your own thing. Speaking of doing our own thing, one thing we do like to do is we close our show and everybody gets ready to close our show.
We have a Kickstarter. We have a Kickstarter going on.
Do we have a Kickstarter going? We do have a Kickstarter. In fact, our new opening mentioned the Kickstarter, but it is worth mentioning again. Talk to us about that, Barb. Talk to us about the Kickstarter.
We have a Kickstarter going on right now with 2 of our most popular books. I'm going to brag here and say one of them is mine.
Absolutely.
Divinity.
Braggadocious.
And braggadocious. Well, if it's true, it's true.
Yeah.
And Trumps, Roland Mann's Trumps. It is running. We have a few more days left. So please jump on board. And if you can't purchase, then share our posts. We've got posts coming out under Silverline. I'm sending out posts on Facebook a couple of times a day. Please share those. And please check out the Kickstarter, because these are kick-ass books. I promise you, you will not be disappointed.
It's even on LinkedIn.
Do that. Do that. Check us out. Barb is on Instagram. Barb is on Twitter. I'm now on Instagram and Twitter. I'm sure everyone else has already been on Instagram and Twitter.
I'm on TikTok, Tumblr, Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook.
I don't have time for that stuff.
LinkedIn.
Rob, you need a social media manager is what you need.
I know. I counted them.
Hire some teeny bopper.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
Hire one of your grandkids to promote stuff on social media. Man.
My one grandchild is like she turns 1 year old this month. So
perfect.
Wow. Old enough. That's old enough.
I'll put her in charge in a year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Aaron Werthers.
That's right.
Deviant Art, Hive, and Reddit. That's my other ones. Yeah. So.
Wow.
And I'm the only Barbara Kilberg on the internet, so it's not exactly like I'm hard to find.
Barb is everywhere. Barb literally, she's
Barb is everywhere, man.
Barb is everywhere, man. Barb is everywhere. That being said, we're not everywhere much longer, but we are somewhere right now.
You don't got to go home, but you can't stay here.
You can't stay here. That's exactly right. Yeah. But we're gonna say it. We're gonna screen it.
There you are.
Make mine.
Make mine.
Silverline.
I'm April Hunter. Make mine Silverline.
All right.